Hello and welcome to this game review. Happy holidays as well. So, in this game, you tried out a new gambit in a classical game. So, firstly, a bit about how to learn openings. So, I would suggest not trying out some random gambits in classical games, as classical games are the most important games. So, if you want to try some gambits out and see if you like them, then you can play them online in rapid games, maybe in some training games and then see how you do. But overall, I would suggest not really wasting your time with such gambits because sooner or later you will have to play real openings in either case. For example, here, well, the Scotch is fine, but here, Bishop c4, it's still kind of fine, but I would just suggest playing the normal Scotch, for example. And this is a fixed kind of structure. The D and E pawns are traded, and the white doesn't really have to prove anything. The piece activity is very easy to get, and the development is also quite straightforward. So when we're playing with white, we shouldn't go into these positions where we must prove something, well, where we must prove compensation for a pawn, because, well, we're playing white. We have the advantage from move one. We don't have to prove anything. We are having the more comfortable game. So if you're going into this chaotic position with white, then you're kind of wasting a white game. You can do this with black, where you are worse from the first move, right? But with white, I wouldn't suggest that. It's just not very practical. And again, you're playing quite a strong opponent, the same rating as yours. So this was a good chance to get some good practice from whatever is your real opening, the Italian, the Spanish, or the Scotch. But here, okay, all these moves are kind of forced. Black seems to know his theory. We take bishop b4, bishop d2. I mean, knight d2 is played. Bishop d2 is possible, but this will be kind of, well, not really an advantage, right? After, for example, this and d5. Black has a decent version of the isolated queen's pawn, as some bishops have been traded. Black has no problems with development, and this knight is misplaced, so black is doing quite fine. So this is not very ambitious. Knight d2 is more ambitious, trying to sacrifice a pawn, which happened in the game, knight e4, d5. So this is all kind of the point, knight e7, castles, takes, and castles. So black has castled, and the black is up a pawn. He does have some problems. Firstly, this pawn that he is up is over on the queen side, and with this strong pawn on d5, it is quite difficult for black to get his majority going, so the pawn isn't really felt for the moment. And the black doesn't really have many defenders around his king. This bishop is a bit stranded on the queen side, and black still hasn't developed the queen side either. So this is kind of the compensation for white, but it is very abstract, as you can imagine. And playing with such abstract compensation isn't really very practical. This is kind of what strong grandmasters do, but this is because they already know the basics. So if they play basic chess, their opponents will not have any problems, right? So they sometimes play stuff like this to surprise the opponent. But of course, objectively, it's not very good. And here, even from this position, it is black who wins most of the time if you check the master's database. So this is not a very practical opening. So a3, so bishop c5, and also with such openings, the problem is white must be very accurate. This is kind of the problem. With bad openings, it's not that they're objectively bad, like the engine will say this is equal or plus 0.1, which is equal as well. The problem is to get these evaluations, you must play the correct moves. If you don't, you will end up worse, because after all, black is a pawn ahead, so he doesn't have to prove anything, he just has to finish development and not get mated in the next few moves. While white must give checkmate or get some kind of other compensation or get the pawn back to equalize. Right? You see, this is the problem. Unless the compensation is very obvious. For me, it's not, because it's not like white has huge development. It's not like there's some kind of attack against the king. So this doesn't really make too much sense. Okay, knight e4, d6, and the knight c5. So now white gets the bishop pair, which is a bit better than not having the bishop pair, but still he is a pawn down. And here b4 is played, but this exchanges black's a doubled pawn, which makes black's pawn felt a bit more. Still, white has decent compensation with the arrows you pointed. White has this unopposed dark squared bishop, which is going to be quite a strong piece. Is it going to be enough for an advantage? Not sure. So here queen d6 is played, queen f3, sacrificing another pawn. This one black shouldn't really take, hence he should focus on finishing development. Maybe something like bishop f5 should be considered. c6 kind of makes sense to try to get rid of the pieces, and as you mentioned, bishop e6 would finish development and trade off the light squared bishops. Still, white shouldn't really be worse. For example, after this, white can even exchange, because in the endgame, the bishop pair will be quite strong, b5, knight e5, maybe bishop e2 or bishop d5. And even though black has a pawn, he's not really going to push it anytime soon. But it's clear that white is not really playing for a win here, as the best he can do is win back the pawn. And even with the bishop pair, with everything else being on one side, it's not really going to be a winning proposition. So queen b4, and now white is 2 pawns down, which means if he doesn't do anything, his position is hopeless, right? He must find a way to get some kind of compensation here and now. And here, tactically, white is better because of queen e2, but only tactically. This doesn't really make chess logical sense, right? It's only working because of tactics on this diagonal that you pointed out, and this is kind of the point. To get a decent position with white after such gambits, we must find these moves, because if we don't, we will end up down in material. So the cost of mistakes has gone up dramatically. And again, when we're playing white, we don't want this. We don't want these risky openings, because already we are better from move 1. We don't have to prove that we are better. We just have to develop sensibly and come up with a decent plan. We don't have to be down material from the start of the game. Okay, bishop e2. Now queen d4. Still, the engine prefers white because of the bishops, but black is finishing development. White's compensation is kind of running out. Still, he can probably take all these pawns and trade it for this pawn, eventually ending in a draw, but I wouldn't be so sure. Rook f8, and here white should finish development with rook ac1. The rook from a1 isn't really doing much, and it seems white's compensation is quite good, not only because this pawn is attacked, but there's also this threat of rook take to c4, winning the bishop. So black is kind of in time to defend. Queen b6, queen g3. These bishops are kind of loose, but it's fine. Bishop d7, rook c7. So white is getting back the material. Knight f5, for example, queen f4, rook e4, and stuff will be traded. Queen e4, queen c7. White does have the bishop pair to compensate the pawn. He has this passed pawn, but still black has these. So if they ever get rolling, black is the one who would win. So bishop b2 is played. Now queen f4, and slowly but surely black is kind of consolidating. All he has to do is develop this rook, get this knight to a better square, and white will run out of compensation. Queen c3, queen g5, rook fe1. And again, this is a very natural move, right? And the natural moves are usually good moves, and good moves should be rewarded. But in such openings, this is simply not good enough, right? And for the reasons are usually quite concrete, and we must play very concretely when we're down 2 pawns. It is quite difficult to play these abstract positions where we're down 2 pawns, but we somehow have compensation. So generally, I would suggest avoiding them. Here, white could have played h4, for example, trying to kick the queen off of this line. For example, if it tries to stay here, after rook ae1, the knight on e7 is less protected. So now after queen c7, this will be a threat. And it seems white is doing quite well. Rook e3 to rook g3 is possible. And with all these pieces, white can at some point have quite a strong attack if he plays his cards right. Instead, rook fe1. But now after knight f5, black connects the rooks. Well, the rooks are kind of connected anyway. Bishop b3. Again, quite a slow move. Now h6, bishop e4. Now rook a2 seems to be a good move, not terribly obvious. Rook e to d8. Bishop goes back, and again white is kind of going back and forth. The engine suggests that he is fine, but wouldn't be too clear to me, as black has free connected passed pawns. Currently, white does have the two bishops aiming at the king, but it wouldn't be so obvious to me that these pieces are bad defenders. So bishop e4, but now rook to b5, and bishop takes f5, but this is quite a bad decision because now white loses all of his compensation, which was in the bishop pair. Now he only has one bishop, black has one bishop as well, and black clearly has free connected passed pawns on the queen side, right? Still, if white gets an attack going, he will be quite fine, as this bishop cannot defend on the dark squares, but there is no real attack, as black can always play the move f6, and also he has a lot of pieces around the king. So the compensation is kind of gone. Instead of bishop takes f5, it seems white can just continue moving around. These pawns can't really move. He can't take this either. It's really not clear what white is supposed to do here. One idea is to try to at least take one pawn. Here queen h4. I guess we could take this pawn, but it's really not obvious how white is supposed to equalize here. His only hope is that these pawns can't really move. But to play for a win seems kind of impossible here, as white must rely on piece play to attack the king. Even if he takes all of these pawns, he doesn't really have an advantage, because everything else is on one side. The bishop pair doesn't matter too much. So bishop takes f5, but now black is winning because of his material. And yeah, here white tries to attack, which is the correct approach, but black finds rook to c5, moving the rook away to a better square with tempo. Queen d4, rook d8, but so this was also allowed. We shouldn't allow the opponent to develop their pieces with tempo, so rook d8 should have been seen. Of course, the queen would like to stay on this diagonal, but this doesn't really seem possible. After queen b4, we are threatening something like rook g3, and the position is still very unpleasant, but if we take these pawns, or at least if we take one of the pawns, with opposite colored bishops, we should be able to hold the draw, as long as we don't get checkmated somehow, and white should be fine. But after queen d4, black finishes his development, and now the game is kind of over because black has time to defend their pawns. Rook a5 is also a good move, exchanging pieces, and here rook e8, king h7, we are kind of down in material here. We are losing the rooks, and after this, the game is over because of background checkmates. So quite an unfortunate game by white, and notice how the whole game white was trying to kind of scramble and get some kind of compensation, right? At no point was white really playing for a win. All his hopes were on some kind of vague attack with the two bishops on the king side. And this is, sure, the engines can play like this, as they are kind of fearless, but playing like this for humans is extremely difficult, and I wouldn't really suggest playing gambits like this, as they're a bit too abstract. We should not make chess more difficult than it already is. Just recapture, develop the pieces, castle the king, be with an equal amount of material, and outplay your opponent because of your better chess abilities. So, hopefully this was useful, and see you next time.